with Clean Energy Council, and this is such a dynamic industry, and the disruptions that we've been discussing so far are forcing change on energy policy and regulations at a really very rapid pace. So barely a week goes by that there's not an attack on us or a new issue or a new policy review process. There's no end of things that an organisation like Clean Energy Council could work on. And one of the things I really like about events like this is it gives me a chance for face-to-face contact with members and non-members who are part of our industry to give me direct feedback on what you think the priorities are and what you think is important and what we ought to be doing. So I wanted to start off first by just giving you a brief outline of how the CEC's priorities for our policy work are determined. They're not determined by me, they're determined by members. We do that through basically elected committees. We have a committee of, or a working group of installers who give us feedback on safety and installation issues. We have, in the solar space, we have a committee of our corporate and sponsoring members, one focused on rooftop solar issues, of which Derek was the chair up to 2 years ago, and now Warwick Johnston is the chair of that committee. We have another committee of our corporate and sponsoring members who are more focused on the large-scale end. Rob Bartrop, who you may know from First Solar, is the chair of that committee. They're elected positions. And then we have, over that, there's an overarching committee called the Solar PV Leadership Committee, comprised of 7 corporate and sponsoring members elected by their peers and 1 associate member of the Clean Energy Council elected by associate member peers. Those committees determine the priorities for my work and for my colleagues' work over the course of the year. They meet about once a quarter to determine, to review progress, determine new priorities. So I guess my advertorial here is to say to you, if you disagree with the priorities, if you disagree with what CEC is doing, get involved, tell us what we should be doing, call into those committee meetings, make your voice heard. We respond to the demands and the priorities of our members, and you're the best source of information about what's important. You're at the coalface, so please get involved, tell us what we ought to be doing, and direct our priorities in the way that you think is best. I'll give you an overview of what the current leadership within the CEC sees as the policy landscape, the way we're approaching it, and what the priorities are for the next 6 months. We tend to work on a fairly short time scale. We tend to focus on the immediate priorities, so we don't look out 10 years. We tend to look more like 1 or 2 years into the future, because in the solar industry, 1 or 2 years is a long time. I'll be focusing on the rooftop solar industry because the issues in the utility scale industry are quite different, and to talk about both would just be complicated and take too long. And I'm just going to do a very basic overview: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, and what are our priorities coming out of that. One of our key strengths, can't be understated, is the popularity. We have so much support. We've tried to harness that support over the last year and a half by supporting the establishment of Solar Citizens and working with them. They're exhibiting here today. I'd strongly encourage you to support Solar Citizens if that's your inclination. They've been very effective in the past in some of our campaigns. They were able to, with a very rapid response, overturn some of the proposals by the Queensland government and the WA government on feed-in tariffs. We saw governments turn around in a matter of days in the strength of public response. We need to learn how to harness that better, but we're getting better at it, and that people power is one of our strongest things we've got going for us. In addition, we've got the workforce, and that also can't be understated. We're at the moment encouraging, working with our members to get our members in front of coalition MPs and the crossbenchers, because that CEC does that all the time, but it's so much stronger if 2 or 3 or 4 companies from a local electorate can go to their local MP and say, you know, I'm an employer, I employ 20 people, you cut the SRES, I'm going to have to lay off 6, 7, 10, whatever people. That is really effective way to get the message to your local MPs. Right now, it's really crucial that we get that message to the coalition, because in the next month or two, the RET review report will be handed up to government, and government's going to have to make a decision about, is this a fight we want to have, or will we let sleeping dogs lie? We want them to decide that this is a fight that's too difficult, and they're better off just leaving it as it is. The recent developments with Clive Palmer and the crossbenchers have really helped us in changing the mood within the coalition as to whether this is a fight worth having or not. I'd also encourage you, if you've got any connections with the crossbenchers, to do whatever you can to get them to understand this industry. There is sympathy there. Ricky Muir came out as a supporter of renewable energy, and that's fantastic. There's also sympathy within the Palmer United Party. If any of you have got connections through family or whatever it is, through work colleagues, any way that you can get to those people and show them the positive aspects of our industry, that's only going to be helpful in the next few months. The next couple of months are going to be really crucial in defending the RET and the SRES, and we need to get to those decision makers, and now's the time to do it. You guys are the people to do that. Solar citizens can harness the consumers, the households. We need to play every card we can in the next month or two. And as has been covered already, the other key strength we've got going for us is the price of solar has come down, and now we're price competitive. So that allows the evolution of exciting new business models and you know, a chance to beat our opponents on their own ground. We do have weaknesses. We're vulnerable to external influences on pricing. Changes to SRES, dumping duties are a potential threat. I won't go into that in depth because that's been talked about a lot over the last three days, but I'm more than happy to take questions if people want to drill down into any of these issues. We're also vulnerable on the question of tariffs, electricity tariffs. You might be aware that there's quite a push to move tariffs away from volumetric tariffs towards more demand or peak tariffs. The Australian Energy Market Commission is currently undertaking a review of distribution network tariffs, and that's the direction they want to take things. Volumetric tariffs are always going to be better for solar. The key thing in any tariff review is that we maintain the principle of technology neutrality. In other words, we've got to push back as strongly as possible on any proposal, such as was proposed by the Queensland Government, to slap special tariffs on households or businesses simply because they have solar. If they reform the tariffs to be more cost reflective in line with the consumption profile, that's a harder issue to push back on. And I don't think that's an existential threat to us, because I think what they can do in moving from more volumetric to more peak or demand-based tariffs, while it makes the business case for solar somewhat less attractive, it makes the business case for storage behind the meter far more attractive. So it just really pushes an opportunity towards storage. So it's as long as we can maintain the principle that no special tariffs should be slapped on a household or a business simply because of your ownership of solar or storage, we should be able to deal with the changes that are being put forward on tariff reforms. CEC's made some submissions to the AEMC review. Anyone who's interested in that, I encourage you to contact me. It's an important issue. It's not a high profile issue, but it's one that does affect the economics and the business case of our industry, and it's important to be across it. As has also been mentioned, grid connection is a real issue. We all know how difficult it is, and that's just getting harder and harder. CEC's engaging with the AER at the moment on reforms to Chapter 5A, but around the process of grid connection. We've also seen Ergon and Energex recently put in place new inverter standards. We think that it's inevitable that the standards for connection of inverter-based energy systems to the grid will be ratcheted up, and they'll need to be more intelligent. We'll need to have more intelligent connections. What we don't want to see is more proliferation of zero export rules. We'd rather see it move towards something like more requirements for reactive power control, for example. We've got an ongoing issue, reputational issue with quality of product and also sales practices. This is the feedback that we've had from the Clean Energy Regulator. Was a few years ago they saw the big reputational issue for our industry as being poor quality installation. With ongoing accreditation and professional development, the feedback we've had from the Clean Energy Regulator is that that's a lot better than it was, and the results they're getting from inspections are better than they were. Their big concern is dodgy sales practices, people over-promising and under-delivering. CEC's taken some steps to address this through a voluntary code of conduct, but there's only so much you can do with a voluntary code. I'm not a big believer in voluntary codes unless they're a step towards something that's a bit more mandatory. But I'm also encouraged by the move that we're seeing a lot more business models of leasing and solar PPAs, because that need to have finance behind you will mean that the standards become ratcheted up, and I think the cowboys of the industry are going to find it very difficult to enter into that space. So that's a positive development, but there's no denying we've got reputational risks from poor quality sales, and we really need to continue working on that, and it's a difficult one to address. You know the opportunities as well as I do. We're seeing significant increase in sales of larger systems to businesses because we've now got a much more competitive offer. We're seeing new business models. I think the solar PPA model is a really interesting one, and the thing that makes me think that this is potentially very disruptive is the strength with which the traditional large electricity retailers opposed this. It was low-key. You didn't see anything in the media about this, but they worked. I know for a fact they had someone full-time on this. They were working to. Their position was that you should be excluded from the solar PPA market, that only full-blown electricity retailers should be able to offer solar PPAs. CEC argued for a pro-competitive position, that that solar PPAs look like competition and that competition is a good thing. The AER took that view, and I think that's very significant. I think this is a real threat to electricity retailers in the long term, and my expectation is that the large electricity retailers will get into this game, because it'll be a choice part of the market. It'll be the sort of offer that gives you a customer that's sticky, that's less likely to jump from retailer to retailer. It gives you the ability to maintain a relationship with a customer that allows you to upsell other products, and I know that the electricity retailers see this as a real threat. I think they will be in there. That's okay. Competition is a good thing. As long as they don't abuse, as long as no one abuses any monopoly sorts of positions, then more competition is good. More solar out there in the households is good. And I think this is an area to watch. And of course the decreasing price of storage that potentially is a total game changer for the way that we manage networks. I mentioned before in response to one of the questions, already distribution companies are telling me that it's a no-brainer that distributed generation and storage is a more economically sensible option than augmenting lines. When you make a line augmentation decision, you're making an investment with a 40-year time frame. Does anyone really think that in 40 years' time, having poles and wires is going to be more competitive than having distributed generation and storage? Particularly where I come from in Victoria, where bushfires have become a real issue. Black Saturday is still a very real and painful memory, and that's led to a lot of pressure on distribution businesses to make sure that there are no bare conductors to put lines underground. That just adds to the cost of distribution in rural areas, meaning that in those areas distributed generation and storage is a very viable option. In fact, if the only thing that's stopping distribution businesses getting into that in a really serious way is that they're constrained from selling electricity because of the regulatory separation of retail and distribution. And who knows, if they were able to get into the solar PPA market, that could be another game changer. I think we've heard a lot about the threats, so just to acknowledge what they are. The RET review, if the SRES is removed altogether, which is, who knows, a possibility, then modelling indicates that sales could drop anywhere from 30 to 50%. Even the government's own modellers anticipated that scrapping the RET altogether would lead to a 30% drop in sales. On top of that, we've got a double whammy with the anti-dumping investigation. We don't know exactly what sort of dumping duties might be applied, if any. The application indicated, the application by the manufacturer in Australia suggested that the dumping was of the order of 25 to 60%. I don't think it's anything like that. It's one more price pressure, one more thing that could increase the cost of solar systems, cut your sales, and lead to job losses in this industry. Barriers to distribution, grid connection, and lack of standards and guidelines for residential storage. We know it's coming. We need to get ahead of the game and make sure that a lack of guidelines and standards isn't a barrier to us. That's our view at the moment of what strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats facing this industry are, and out of that, the elected representatives of this industry who tell me what my priorities and my colleagues what my priorities should be have told us that what we ought to be doing is, above all, protect SRES, focus on the RET review. So that's been the vast majority of our resources and our time this year. Continue with accreditation, continue maintaining and improving the standards in installation, establish and build a retailer code of conduct so that we can weed out some of the cowboys in the industry who are giving us a bad reputation through dodgy sales practices. We're looking at linking that retailer code of conduct now to tendering processes. We're speaking to government, local and state, so that it becomes part of the procurement process, so that there's a real incentive there, and it's not just something that we're hoping that you market to your customers, but it becomes a hurdle that you need to jump over in order to access certain jobs. I've mentioned the review of distribution network tariffs. That's another of our priorities. We're focusing on making sure that solar's not penalised unfairly. We just announced yesterday, I think it was, a project within CEC. We've received funding of, I think it was $500,000 from ARENA to do a lot more focused work on distribution grid connection, solve some of the issues that are really technically complex, like putting an economic value and then monetising the value of distributed generation to grid investment, the avoided investment in augmentation. We know that's real, but it's a bugger to put a price on it, and it's even trickier to figure out who deserves that economic benefit and how you would put the right incentives in place to get the right investment to reduce future need for poles and wires. But that's one of the tasks we've set for ourselves. Developing better standards for inverter connection to the grid, for grid connected storage, and working on guidelines and standards so that when grid connected residential storage takes off, we're not facing regulatory barriers because we don't have installation standards and safety standards in place. So that's a really quick overview. If you disagree with the priorities, that's fine. I'm happy to hear your perspective on what we ought to be doing. But if you want to make sure that that is what becomes our priorities next year, then you need to get involved. You need to join some of these committees with your colleagues and direct the priorities and make sure that we're doing what's really important to the industry. Thanks.
All right, way in front of schedule. We're very efficient. So I suppose we'll just move into a bit more of a general forum in regards to questions. I've certainly got one for Darren just to kick it off. Last time I spoke to you about how the RET was going, all of the toing and froing behind closed doors with the politicians. It seemed to have turned around quite a bit. Well, certainly you seemed a lot more optimistic. Would you be able to, first of all, explain whether or not I got that right?
Yeah.
And also, why and how do you believe it is more optimistic? And if you can crystal ball it, where do you think it's going to go?
Sure. Every sitting week of Parliament for the last probably at least 12 months, we've had members, staff of CEC in Canberra lobbying, speaking to MPs, speaking to politicians, speaking to bureaucrats about SRES and the RED. Last week was the first week that our people came back from Canberra with big smiles on their faces. And the reason for that is that they detected a real change in mood in the coalition. The change in mood in the coalition has gone from we can do what we want to, gee, this is really difficult and we're not going to be able to do everything we want, and is this a fight that we're going to take on, and if we take it on, how do we take it on? So there's a chink there that wasn't there before, and that's why I was saying that I think now is a really important time for any of you, if you've got an opportunity to get to a coalition MP, do it now, because they're really tossing up, is this a fight we want to have? Of course we want them to decide that it's not a fight worth having. It's also worth getting to the crossbenches, but in the next month or so, the decision needs to be made by the coalition. If the coalition decides it's a fight they want to have, then we need to focus on the crossbenches to try to make sure that they lose that fight.